This video it's about massive bells that were destroyed, dismantled before 1913. They were exposed at the Chicago exhibition in North America in 1901, then removed and transported to an unknown location. This study follow a research on these bells. They had some frequencies connected with an electrical grid of an empire called Tartaria that was erased from the history books. The author found maps of these large bells locations, and they follow a certain grid. Certain bells have certain frequencies. Some frequency of such bells were restricted to be broadcasted, so this bell were silenced. The researcher went one step further, looking inside of the bell, and apparently inside of the bell there were circular copper wires that seems to be part of an electrical circuit. The technology and the functionality of such electrical grid that dates prior to 1812, it's not completely understood. So let's listen to the explanation.
And was transferred to a distant posting within the month. His file notes reassignment at ministry request. The rail company's log for 5th of November mentions only 2 units loaded onto flat cars. In the margin, a superintendent scrawled, "Third vessel diverted by order."
So this part talks about the removal of these bells, and the author followed the logs of the ships, the records of the ships that transported the bells that produce a frequency that was forbidden to be heard. Apparently in North America, we know that sometimes at the beginning of 20th century, the frequency of 432 hertz was replaced with 440. 432, it's a healing frequency.
Of ministry, no further details. Dock workers, interviewed decades later by local historians compiling oral traditions, remembered the odd cargo. One man reportedly remarked to his son, "We were told they were for water. They rang like church metal when the chain struck them." The sound, he said, seemed to hang in the fog longer than it should have. Cold mist beaded on the smooth metal surfaces as they were hoisted, droplets running in thin lines along curves designed to focus vibration. No photographs of the Odessa vessels have surfaced despite extensive searches in maritime archives, but an undated sketch in a ministry folder shows a bell-shaped shell with external lugs for cables instead of a yoke for hanging. The manifest year, 1913, sits uneasily beside a telegram referencing similar cargo in 1907, as if the same shipment were recorded twice under different pretexts, or as if a pattern of such shipments continued over years without acknowledgement. Today, the rail line from Odessa runs past modern transmission towers, their silhouettes rhyming with old engravings of giant bells on flat cars. Officially, the objects were anonymous industrial containers. Unofficially, they looked like parts of a network that never made it into public sound. On a rainy evening in London in October 1962, in a small flat overlooking the railway lines of Bloomsbury, an independent researcher spread photocopies across a kitchen table. The documents, maps from Paris, blueprints from Philadelphia, foundry ledgers from Bochum, shipping lists from Odessa, were all dated between 1874 and 1913, yet shared an unsettling similarity. The researcher, whose name appears in academic bibliographies only as HTM, and whose affiliation remains unclear, had spent years gathering these fragments from archives across 3 continents. When pinned to a larger map of Eurasia and traced with a pencil, the locations of the known giant bells aligned along arcs that match major telegraph routes, and more faintly, geomagnetic contours that modern science uses to model the planet's invisible fields. In a spiral notebook, the researcher labeled the pattern Tartarian grid, borrowing a term from older maps that once labeled a vast, ill-defined region simply Tartary. A margin note reads, bells not as signals, but as nodes. Acoustic EM induction, low-frequency carrier. The hypothesis, never published in any peer-reviewed journal, suggested that the bells formed a network designed to interact with Earth's natural electromagnetic resonance. In one taped interview, discovered decades later in a university's uncatalogued materials, the researcher's voice, thin on old reel-to-reel tape, remarks, they built cathedrals over some, exhibitions around others. The bells are the only constant. Everything else changes, but the bells remain in place, even when they're removed from the record. The room smelled of damp paper and gas from the stove. A faint vibration came through the floor each time a train passed, rattling teaspoons in their saucers. The alignment lines, drawn on the composite map, intersect near modern infrastructure. Power stations, radio masts, dense grids of steel and wire. One of the bell sites appears under a contemporary dam reservoir. Another sits beneath a broadcast tower erected in the 1950s. Official histories mention nothing of a 19th century resonant grid, yet the distances between the bells, when calculated, repeat certain wavelengths in the very low frequency spectrum that modern science uses to study the Earth's electromagnetic cavity. Frequencies between 3 and 30 Hz that pass through rock and water with minimal attenuation. The pattern may be coincidence, or it may be the fading diagram of a system that used sound to lean on the planet's own hum. In May 1897, surveyors working for the Russian Empire's Central Asian Railway stood on a dusty hill outside Samarkand, measuring angles under a sharp blue sky. The Registan's turquoise domes shimmered in the distance, and the air carried the smell of dry earth and distant cook fires. Their trigonometrical sketch, dated 20th or May 1897, uses familiar landmarks: a mosque's turquoise dome, a slender minaret, the distant outline of a ruined fortress. In the background of one field photograph, rarely reproduced in official railway histories, a massive bronze bell lies on its side, near a half-collapsed brick platform, its surface decorated with geometric reliefs reminiscent of both Islamic muqarnas and older step patterns that predate any known regional tradition. The survey report labels the bell simply abandoned metal, but a traveller's diary from the same year, written by a French engineer passing through on his way to inspect irrigation works. Notes. Locals say it once stood between towers, humming at sunset when certain winds rose from the desert. The engineer attempted to measure the bell's dimensions, but was discouraged by local authorities, who claimed the area was sacred ground, despite the absence of any shrine or marker. The official map shows only the domes and minarets. The bell platform goes unmarked although the same sketch uses it as a reference for angle measurements, suggesting the surveyors found it significant enough to triangulate from, but not to record. Heat shimmered above the stones, the air carrying a faint metallic smell from the weathered bronze. When modern researchers overlay the 1897 survey with satellite imagery, a curious alignment emerges. The mosque dome, minaret, and bell platform form a straight line that continues along the route of the old telegraph poles and, much later, a high-voltage transmission line built in the Soviet era. The distances between similar trios, dome, tower, bell, across Central Asia, repeat within a narrow margin of error, echoing ratios seen in resonant cavity calculations. No document states that these structures were parts of a single system, yet again and again, architecture, metal, and invisible lines of force occupy the same straight path. The label Tartaria may belong to old maps and internet theories, but the geometry itself remains stubbornly present, measurable, undeniable.
Get a medium stuffed crunch.
So in Mexico City, in Mexico, I visited a city called Puebla. There is a church with a very large bells. These bells were not they were extremely heavy. So the guide says, "Oh, an angel came and installed the bells in one night," meaning in Puebla, the ability of small people was surpassed by somebody else in in the technology of installing extremely large bells in the Cathedral of Puebla. Not all the bells in that cathedral are still in the church, in the cathedral. Some of them are removed, basically, but some still stand in top of the extremely large cathedral built with extremely large stones.